I never imagined the day would come when I would fight beside monsters, not in the metaphorical sense, but in the very literal, hulking reptilian gladiators from Xander 9 with eyes that glowed like molten coals. Telepathic cephalopods from the deep voids of the Trailax belt who communicated through pulses of bioluminescence, and metal-bodied constructs from the forge cults of Alcarian who had long since replaced flesh with chrome. We stood shoulder to shoulder on Drelith Prime, a rotting jungle world where even the rain hissed with acid, facing down the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known, the Koru, the Devourers, the Swarm, the hunger that came from beyond the known stars. Entire civilizations had vanished before we could even learn their names. For over a year, I fought and bled alongside these creatures, aliens I once feared and despised, but who became my brothers in arms. The war wasn't clean. We lost entire battalions in hours. The Koru adapted to our weapons, evolved mid-battle, learned our languages just to whisper fear into our comms. Yet through all this we held them at bay, not with unity, not with valor, but with desperation. We were survivors clinging to a crumbling wall. Our fleet was in ruins, supplies dwindled, morale shattered, and hope a word no longer spoken aloud. Then the Terrans arrived. Earth's forces, long isolated in their corner of the spiral arm, had finally answered the call. But it wasn't their ships that impressed me, they were outdated, built for atmospheric war more than orbital sieges. It wasn't their tech, they lacked the neural weaponry of the Drax or the hive drones of the Jthel. No, it was something else. Something no one expected. I watched as they landed on the ruined outpost of Theta 12, not with the caution of diplomats or the precision of tacticians, but with the resolve of those who had nothing to lose. They didn't talk of retreat. They didn't scan for reinforcements. They simply marched into the hell of Koru-held territory like it was just another storm to weather. Their commander, a woman named Sergeant Reyna Hollow, was half my size and twice my courage. I saw her drag a dying Velner brute twice her weight through collapsing trenches, then return with bloodied fists to fight hand-to-hand with a Koru warlasher, snapping its chitinous neck like dry wood. What made the humans terrifying wasn't their strength. It was their refusal to die quietly. They screamed their defiance into the black, they weaponized grief, turned loss into fury. Where other species retreated to regroup, they advanced. Where we paused to mourn the fallen, they pressed harder, angrier. And in their wake, something awakened in the rest of us, a flicker of that same madness, that same fire. It was the humans who reminded us that war isn't always about survival. Sometimes it's about standing so stubbornly that even death hesitates to come for you. I had fought beside monsters. But it was only when I fought beside humans that I learned what real monsters looked like, because sometimes the most terrifying thing in the universe is a species that refuses to surrender even when it's already lost everything. Underscore 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 underscore. The Koru's counterattack came swift and merciless, like a second storm following the first before we'd even caught our breath. Black Hollow Ridge, once a forward command base turned refugee zone, became our last bastion. Surrounded on all sides, cut off from orbital supply lines, and with no reinforcements en route, we dug in not out of strategy but out of sheer defiance. I remember the look in the eyes of the alien coalition forces, my comrades, yes, but also war-weary remnants of 1,000 shattered fleets. The Xander commander, a being named Tarsk with a jaw like a sledgehammer and a mind hardened by centuries of combat, surveyed the horizon with grim resignation. He had fought the Koru across 3 systems, and now he expected to die here. Even the Forge cult's constructs, once stoic and unreadable, flickered with quiet despair in their optical sensors. But the humans, they were different. I watched Reyna Hollow gather her squad, just 32 Terran infantry, most no older than 25 standard cycles, all scarred and ragged from weeks of relentless combat, and speak to them not of tactics but of memory. Remember Earth, she said, not as a slogan but as an invocation. Remember what they took from us. And remember what we are. Her voice didn't echo through amplified comms. It didn't need to. It rooted itself in every chest within earshot. She wasn't a general. She wasn't even an officer with stars on her shoulders. But in that moment, she was the spine holding the entire defense together. When the Koru came, they came in waves. Crawlers, flyers, war brutes tall as siege towers. black chitined monstrosities with razored limbs and venomous breath. Our lines buckled within hours. Plasma shields melted. Trenches became graves. The bioluminescent Tralaxians fell first, their empathic screams broadcasting agony across every frequency. I saw Drax Warpriest detonate his own core reactor to buy us 2 more minutes of retreat. I saw Alcarian constructs melting their own limbs to seal breach points with liquefied alloy. And in the heart of the chaos, there were the Terrans still standing. Hollow's squad didn't retreat. They didn't dig in. They advanced. Through fire, through rot, through enemy lines that should have overwhelmed any sane force. They pushed forward with outdated slug throwers and blunt melee gear, firing into Koru ranks until their barrels warped from heat. When one of them fell, another picked up their weapon and kept moving. No one stopped to grieve. No one looked back. It was as if they knew something we didn't, that pain could be fuel, that despair could be a weapon sharper than any blade. I fought beside Hollow at the 3rd Ridge Breach where a Koru butcherbeast, 15 feet tall and armored in living bone, rampaged through her flank. She had no heavy weapon, no explosives, just a rusted Terran vibro knife and a stubbornness that made the stars seem dim. She leapt onto its back, tore through its eye socket with her bare hand and rode its collapsing carcass into a fire trench. When I asked her later why she hadn't retreated, why she hadn't waited for support, her answer was simple: because I'm human. We don't wait to be saved. We become the reason someone else survives. That sentence has haunted me ever since. The ridge held, but barely. By the time the last Koru beast was slain, only 12 Terrans remained, coated in blood and ash, standing on ground scorched by the fires of 3 suns. But the Koru didn't return, not that day. They pulled back, confused, perhaps afraid. And for the first time in my long and bitter military career, I saw something I never thought possible: monsters with no fear now hesitating because of a race too stubborn to die. That night, we didn't celebrate. We didn't have the energy. We buried our dead Terran and alien alike beneath stones and scrap and whispered names into the wind. But something had changed in all of us. The fear that once chained us had begun to rust. And in its place, something else had taken root. Not hope, not yet. But something more dangerous: belief. Belief that maybe, just maybe, the Terrans weren't just another species fighting for survival. Maybe they were the virus inside death's throat. Maybe they were the fury that even extinction couldn't silence. Underscore 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 underscore. We built the wall of bones not from pride, but necessity. There was no stone, no alloy, no reinforced nanoconcrete to fortify the perimeter. Supplies were ash, engineering units dead, construction bots torn apart before they could deploy. So we built it from the dead. The bodies of the Koru, stacked 6 meters high, their twisted limbs lashed with scavenged fiber wire, hardened by the freezing night winds of Drelitha's northern continent. It was grotesque, morbid, and undeniably effective. The stench alone was enough to halt most lesser predators, and even the Koru seemed disturbed by the sight of their fallen used as bulwarks. But what disturbed them more was that it had been the Terrans' idea. I was there when Sergeant Hollow made the call. We'd lost the southern corridor, and the command network was collapsing under jamming interference. Reyna stood over a bloodied comms table, listening to a dying Tralaxian whisper the locations of collapsing sectors. Her jaw clenched, her eyes unblinking, and then she simply said, "Stack the bastards. Make them see what's waiting next time they come." No one questioned her. Not the Xander, not the Alcarian, not even the spectral-minded Vorkari who believed in spiritual purity above all else. We followed orders like zealots, dragging the twisted husks of our enemies into position, each body a crude brick in our makeshift fortress. And as we worked, something strange happened. The fear faded. The exhaustion dulled. There was a rhythm to the madness, a ritual in defiance. Humans have this way of turning even horror into momentum. What should have broken our minds only hardened our wills. That wall, ugly, foul, unholy by most standards, became a symbol. Not just of survival, but of what we were becoming alongside the humans. Not civilized soldiers of a galactic alliance, but predators. Fighters. Killers who refused to be erased. That night, the Koru returned. Not in force, but in hunting packs, testing our defenses, sniffing for weakness. What they found was the wall. I watched as the first of them approached, a stalker cast alpha, tall and serrated, its head crowned with bioluminescent feelers. It paused when it saw the wall. Sniffed. Looked. Then screamed. Not a war cry, no, it was something else. A sound of confusion, of disgust. It charged. We let it come. And then the humans struck. They didn't wait for protocol or confirmation. Reyna's squad had laced the wall with thermite traps and sonic grenades, hidden beneath the rib cages of the Koru corpses. When the stalker made contact, the entire eastern face of the wall erupted in a firestorm of shrieking plasma and burning bone. The air ignited. The screams of Koru hunting beasts filled the sky. And above it all, we heard the humans laughing. Not cruelly, not with joy, but with a grim kind of satisfaction, like engineers watching a dangerous machine finally do what it was designed for. Afterward, we found Hollow standing atop the still-smoking carcasses, surveying the charred field beyond. One of her men, a thin, pale techie named Mars, asked her what came next. She looked out over the dead and simply said, "Now they know we don't flinch. We don't fear them. And we don't bury our enemies. We stack them high enough for the next wave to see." That line spread like a virus across the camps, through whispers and shared comlinks from species who barely understood human idioms. Stack them high. It became a motto, a chant etched onto the armor of soldiers who had never before spoken Terran standard. It wasn't strategy. It was psyche warfare. And it worked. Over the next weeks, we noticed a shift in the Koru patterns. Less aggression. More probing. Fewer mass assaults. They began testing us like we were the predators now. And maybe we were. Fighting beside humans had changed us all. The Trilaxians stopped singing mourning hymns and started reciting kill counts. The Ulcarian constructs modified their own AI cores to emulate Terran unpredictability. Even the proud Xander, who once viewed humans as primitive, started carrying Terran blades. It was as if humanity's madness, their resilience, their absolute refusal to die quietly was contagious. And perhaps that was their true strength. Not technology, not numbers, not even courage. But a kind of psychological infection that spread to allies and enemies alike. An infection that whispered, "Stand, fight, burn everything if you must, but never ever kneel." Underscore 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 underscore. They told us orbital control was impossible. They said the Koru had established permanent space superiority around Drellith Prime, that every skylane was patrolled by living warships bred in stellar nurseries. That every drone cluster we launched was disassembled mid-flight by swarms of Koru spores before they could even ping a signal. For months, the skies had been theirs, a roiling black ocean of teeth and radiation, and we, the creatures trapped beneath the waves, choking in the dirt. The Galactic Coalition sent prayers instead of payloads. But Reyna Hollow wasn't interested in prayers. She was interested in payloads and payback. The plan was madness. Steal a grounded Koru biocruiser, pilot it through the death ring above the planet, and manually detonate a stolen Terran nuke from inside the ship's neural core. The goal? Disrupt their fleet's psychic lattice. A web of living thought that the Koru used to coordinate their warforms and open a breach wide enough for a surviving human gunship wing to punch through. It was suicide. No species had ever hijacked a Koru ship and lived to tell of it. But Reyna wasn't planning to live. She was planning to make sure the rest of us could. Her squad was down to 6. 6 humans with makeshift gear, patched armor, and an unshakable resolve that seemed drawn not from logic but from something deeper. Something primal. I volunteered to go with them. I was a xenotactician from the Velner Warcast, born to memorize enemy formations, not to breach bioorganic dreadnoughts from the inside. But I couldn't let her go alone. None of us could. The raid began in silence. We crawled through the husks of our dead, moved beneath the acid clouds, and waited for the cruiser's tendrils to settle in the soil during its energy-feeding cycle. The ship was alive. Breathing, pulsing, communicating with others of its kind through pheromones and neural pulses. We had 1 minute to cut into its underbelly before it screamed for help. It was the most terrifying 60 seconds of my life. I watched Mars, the techie, slice open the hull with a plasma saw while Reyna shoved thermal charges into the membranes to stun the ship's pain receptors. We entered a chamber that felt like the inside of a living lung, wet, hot, with walls that flexed around us like it wanted to digest our bones. The ship fought back. Acidic nerves lashed at us. Drone cells hatched mid-run. We lost 2 of the 6 before we even reached the core. But Reyna didn't stop. I remember her screaming something that sounded like a Terran prayer or maybe a curse before plunging the stolen nuclear core into the ship's psychic brain. The moment the detonation began, the ship started howling. I don't mean noise, I mean thoughts. It screamed in every mind, every channel, every dream. Across the planet, the Koru faltered. Their neural link shattered. And for the first time in 2 years, their sky darkened. That's when the human gunships came. Dozens of them. Old Terran atmosphere breakers with cracked wings and patched engines roaring through the breach like metal phoenixes on fire. They didn't have plasma weapons or particle beams. They had old-fashioned missiles, flak guns, and fury. I watched them tear through the Koru orbiters like buzzards through carrion. I watched a species with second-tier tech burn first-tier monsters from the sky, not with superior tools but with perfect timing, guts, and suicidal courage. We thought we lost Reyna. The cruiser imploded before we could extract. But then, against all logic, all reason, a single figure emerged from the fire, wrapped in a shredded heat cloak, dragging Mars behind her. Burned, coughing blood, but smiling. I asked her how she survived. She laughed and said, "Koru hearts are big. Give me just enough room to hide behind." That day, we watched the impossible happen. We, the remnants of the so-called Great Galactic Alliance, watched humans steal the sky from the gods of war. It wasn't just a victory. It was a message. The Terrans weren't playing by the old rules. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't care about odds. When the sky was taken from them, they didn't wait for it to be given back. They took it. With blood. With madness. With fire. And the rest of us? We followed. Because once you've seen a human walk out of a nuclear fire laughing, you stop believing in impossible. Underscore 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 underscore. After we took the sky, the Koru did something we didn't expect. They retreated. Not tactically. Not to regroup. They simply vanished. Entire swarms, whole hive strains, just dissolved into the wind, leaving behind fields of husks and smoldering biomass that melted into the soil like they were never there. The silence was unbearable. We had grown so used to the rhythm of war, the screams, the gunfire, the endless night terrors, that the sudden stillness felt more ominous than any bombardment. For 3 standard days, not a single Koru lifeform was recorded on any scan, any comms channel, any battlefield. The wall of bones stood untouched. Our anti-orbital emplacements went unused. The human gunships hovered like vultures over empty canyons. It was Reyna Hollow who first suspected the truth, not that they had fled, but that they were preparing something worse. "They're not running," she said, staring out at the ash-covered plains beyond our outpost. "They're recoiling. Winding up for the kind of hit that ends history." She was right. On the 4th day, the ash began to fall, not flakes, not dust, but thick, oily sheets of black matter that blotted out the light and muffled all sound. We learned too late that it wasn't weather. It was a psychic toxin, a living fog exhaled by a Koru mineship that had settled into the upper atmosphere. It didn't kill quickly. It sank into our thoughts. Our dreams. Soldiers began reporting voices. Memories that weren't theirs. Emotions that belonged to the dead. I watched as Xander Warbrute slit his own throat with a shard of bone, whispering apologies to a family that had never existed. Trilaxians began humming melodies that made blood vessels burst. Even Ulcarian constructs started glitching, their AI cores broadcasting ancient Earth lullabies they had no reason to know. The toxin, we learned, wasn't just meant to kill. It was meant to overwrite, to erase who we were, to fill us with noise, with madness, until we weren't soldiers anymore, just husks wearing the faces of the fallen. Hollow and her humans were hit just like the rest of us, but they fought it differently. While others isolated or purged themselves, the Terrans did something bizarre. They gathered around fires. They sang. They told stories. I saw them paint crude images on the inside walls of the bunker, memories of Earth, childhood pets, old cities long since reduced to irradiated stone. When I asked Hollow why they weren't trying to suppress the memories, she said, "Because the Koru are trying to overwrite us. So we overwrite back. Louder. It worked." The toxin couldn't fully infect those who already had noise inside them. Real, raw, emotional chaos. The human's inner storms confused the psychic code. Where it tried to mimic grief, it found real grief already there, screaming louder. Where it tried to implant fear, it collided with traumas the humans had already survived. They weren't immune. They were just so broken, so saturated in emotion, that the Koru's virus couldn't find clean ground. So Hollow made a new plan. We'd fight back with memory, with noise, with ghost songs. We wired the entire outpost with human music, earth frequencies, unfiltered sound dumps of Terran cities at rush hour, children laughing, storms hitting tin roofs. We looped it all into the comms net, blasted it into the ash-choked sky like a sonic virus. The Koru mineship reacted immediately. Panicked, furious. It descended from orbit in a mass of writhing limbs and organ cannons determined to silence the broadcast. That's when Hollow led the charge. Not with tanks. Not with air support. With sound. Her squad carried mobile amplifiers. We followed, confused but desperate. As the Koru descended, she marched straight into the toxin storm, screaming verses from ancient earth poems, roaring lyrics into the fog until even my mind began to clear. Others joined. I remember a Drax priest bellowing Terran opera at the top of his lungs. A Velner warshifter mimicking an Earth preacher's sermon. A Forge cult drone replaying old jazz through a chest-mounted speaker. Madness? Maybe. But it worked. The Koru mineship reeled, confused, overwhelmed. Its thought lattice fractured. That's when the human commandos climbed it. No ships. No guns. They climbed the beast like mountaineers, cutting into its hide with vibro hatchets and teeth. Hollow was the first to reach the brainstem. She drove a speaker core right into the thing's neural maw and hit play. The last thing that monster ever heard was the sound of a child's voice saying, "I miss you, Mommy." The mineship screamed and died. The ash cleared. The toxin faded. We lost hundreds to the fog, but thousands were saved. And from that day, every Terran unit carried music into battle. Not just as morale, but as a weapon. We'd discovered something terrifying about humans. Their emotions weren't weaknesses. They were armor. Fire. Ammunition. While most species tried to keep their minds pure, clean, focused, the humans made theirs messy, chaotic, and full because it made them harder to break. And in that, we found our strategy. The war wasn't just in the flesh. It was in the mind. And humans? Humans had minds like hurricanes. Underscore 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 underscore. We were never prepared for the return of the dead, not metaphorically, not emotionally, but physically, literally. It began in the northern war zone where our fallen had been buried beneath ice and metal and time. First came the whispers, units claiming to see old squad mates standing at the edges of blast craters, motionless. Then came the reports of patrols being followed by figures that couldn't be confirmed on thermal scans. And then, one night, a Forge cult sentry drone opened fire on a Terran medic station, claiming the soldiers within were transmitting Koru frequencies. The aftermath revealed something we couldn't have predicted. The Koru had found a way to reanimate our dead. Not raise them in flesh, no, the Koru didn't bother with corpse puppets. They reanimated memories. Neural patterns. Entire personality maps of those lost to war, recreated in psychic echo, housed inside cloned flesh built from spliced biomass. We called them Echo Soldiers. They looked like our dead. Spoke like them. Moved like them. Fought like them. But they weren't them. They were traps designed to draw us in, break our lines, infiltrate our ranks. I remember the first time I saw one. It was Captain Juno Cross of the Terran 22nd, killed 2 months prior while shielding a troop transport with her own body during an orbital breach. She was a hero. Revered. Her name had been carved into the ridge walls beside the fallen. And yet there she was, walking toward the outpost perimeter with calm eyes, perfect uniform, not a scratch on her. Hollow froze when she saw her. The two had served together for over a decade. Juno even saved Reyna's life during the Battle of Orin's Vale. I watched Hollow step forward, trembling, her hand hovering above her sidearm. "Juno?" she asked. The thing smiled. It had her voice. Her face. "It's okay now, Reyna," it said. "You don't have to fight anymore." That's when Hollow shot it in the head. No hesitation. Just pain. The bullet tore through its skull, and it didn't bleed, it leaked something else. A kind of silver ooze laced with fibers. Artificial. Engineered. The corpse collapsed like a broken puppet. Hollow didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just turned and ordered a full psychic sweep of the outpost. That was the beginning of the hardest campaign we ever fought, not against the Koru swarm, but against our own memories. The battlefield was no longer trenches and ash fields, it was the inside of our minds. Every soldier had to be tested daily. Every familiar face was doubted. We stopped trusting even ourselves. But again, it was the humans who found the solution, not with tech, not with weapons, but with something only they had mastered: identity. You see, most species in the coalition shared consciousness, genetic memory, or ancestral downloads. Their sense of self was communal, traceable, static. But humans? Humans were chaos. Their sense of self changed year to year, moment to moment. They could reinvent themselves mid-war, mid-sentence. That made them harder to clone, harder to mimic. The Echo soldiers couldn't replicate inconsistency. They could mimic language, posture, even memory, but not evolution. That became our test. Hollow instituted what she called the question protocol. Every soldier was paired with another and given a deeply personal question. Something only a shifting, chaotic mind could answer. For Hollow, it was, "What did your father say when he caught you the first time you broke curfew?" I asked her once what the answer was. She said, "He didn't say anything. He just lit a cigarette and passed it to me. That's how I knew I wasn't a kid anymore." That kind of response, the kind soaked in contradiction, nostalgia, and pain, was impossible for the Koru to simulate. And so we survived. Not with fire, not with steel, but with memory. The right kind. Messy, illogical, deeply human. The Koru never cracked the protocol. Their Echo soldiers began to fail. They couldn't understand why we wept while laughing, why we told lies to protect truths, why our nightmares sometimes gave us strength. They didn't understand that humans didn't just remember the past, they weaponized it. Every loss became a reason to rise. Every fallen friend, a voice in the storm. I watched Hollow begin to record the names of the reanimated, each one an insult to her soul, and with every bullet she fired, she whispered, "You're not them. But I am still me." And that was the weapon the Koru could never counter. Identity. That unbreakable, unreplicable Terran madness of being both broken and whole, grieving and laughing, burning and rebuilding at the same time. It was then I realized what the Koru truly feared. Not strength, not numbers, but memory. Because while they could mimic our flesh, they could never steal what made the humans indestructible: the ability to remember pain and still choose to fight again tomorrow. We knew it was coming, the final breach, as Command called it. Not a battle, not an assault, but an extinction-level event planned with the cold patience of a species that had never needed to rush, because time was always on its side. The Koru didn't just want to win anymore. They wanted erasure. They wanted legacy-deep annihilation. And they had the weapon to do it. A singularity hive-mind core known as the Void Spire, buried beneath the crust of Drellith Prime like a cancerous root system waiting to blossom. It had been dormant for centuries, perhaps millennia, feeding on death, memory, and pain. Every psychic scream, every battlefield loss, every decaying corpse had been fuel to awaken it. The spire wasn't just a beacon, it was a godbrain, a central processor of the entire Koru swarm. Once activated, it would pulse across subspace like a shockwave, rewriting every sentient mind in the system, converting us not with war, but with sheer mental domination. The Koru had finally decided that if they could not defeat humanity through death, they would overwrite them through thought. One signal, one pulse, one last breath, and everything we were would dissolve into them. When Hollow received intel about the Spire's awakening, she didn't hesitate. "We breach," she said. "No plan B, no fallback. Just a single order that resonated through the comms like a gunshot in the dark. Breach." Every allied species gathered what remained. The Xander brought plasma detonators older than some star systems. The Trilaxians, though few remained, offered psychic shielding. The Ulcarian Forge cult converted themselves into living weapons, reformatting their own bodies into siege charges. And the humans, those tired, burned, battered creatures, just smiled grimly and prepared to run headfirst into the impossible one last time. We descended into the crust, through dead cities and hollowed bones of lost civilizations, following the pulses of madness emanating from the spire. The deeper we went, the louder it got, not just in sound, but in thought. Memories were hijacked. I relived my childhood, twisted and filtered through the lens of something alien. I saw myself dying in ways I had never imagined. I saw loved ones blaming me for wars I never fought. The Spire was rewriting us even before it reached full power. Troops began to fall, not from injury but identity collapse. Minds shattered mid-step. People forgot who they were, what they fought for, why they even held a weapon. We kept moving. Hollow led the charge with a simple phrase on repeat: anchor down. It meant nothing at first, just a phrase to center ourselves. But it became everything. Anchor down. In memory. In purpose. In self. Every step was a war inside the mind, and the humans once again had the advantage. Because their minds were already battlefields. Hollow had prepped her squad in the days leading up to the assault with recorded voice files from their families. Not strategy. Not tactics. Just reminders. This is your sister. You were always the brave one. This is Dad. Remember the beach on Terra 6? This is Mom. I'm proud of you even if I never said it. They played these recordings on loop as we descended. At first I thought it was weakness, nostalgia in a death zone. But now I understand. It was armor. Emotional flak jackets. Shields of memory wrapped in love, regret, defiance. And when the Spire finally came into view, towering, pulsating, impossible, it didn't find blank slates to overwrite. It found lives already overflowing with noise. The final battle wasn't fought with bullets or blades. It was fought with identity. The Spire tried to absorb us. One by one, it reached into our minds. I watched aliens fall to their knees, weeping, singing, screaming. But the humans? They shouted back. They screamed their names. Hollow stood before the Spire and shouted every name of every soldier she had ever lost like a dirge-turned battle cry. Then she did the unthinkable. She stepped into the Spire. Alone. Carrying the last of the Forge cult's living bombs fused into her chest plate. We begged her not to. But she simply turned and said, "We make our stand where we are most afraid." That's what it means to be human. Her last transmission was a whisper, hoarse, cracked, tired, anchor down. And then the Spire exploded. It didn't just shatter. It evaporated into silence, into thoughtless void. Every Koru in the system collapsed where they stood. Mindless. Empty. Their network gone. We had one. But not through fire. Not through numbers. Through one soul so stubborn, so defiant, it chose death rather than be rewritten. Hollow gave herself to protect something the Koru could never understand, the sanctity of identity. Of memory. Of chaos. Of humanity. And in her sacrifice, the rest of us rediscovered ourselves. Underscore 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 underscore. The war was over, but peace did not come. Not at first. Victory, when it arrived, felt like a silence too vast to understand. After the Void Spire fell and the Koru mines went dark, the battlefield stilled in a way that made us nervous. For hours, we didn't move. No one fired. No one spoke above a whisper. It was as if the universe itself had taken a breath it wasn't sure how to release. I walked among the corpses, ours and theirs. Some were still twitching. Others had no faces left, just scorched silhouettes frozen in defiance. Of Reyna Hollow, there was nothing left but the crater and the echoes, recordings of her final stand bouncing across dying comm channels, replayed by soldiers like sacred mantras. We tried to rebuild, of course. The Galactic Coalition sent ships again. They came with medics, engineers, diplomats, all dressed in clean uniforms and wide-eyed horror. They saw what we had become and didn't know what to make of it. We were no longer who we had been. The Trilaxians no longer sang in harmonious tones. They spoke in Terran curses and offbeat war chants. The Alcarian constructs began welding human graffiti into their chassis, images of fists, fire, and broken chains. The Xander warriors carved earth words into their armor. Rage, grit, hollow lives. Even I, a lifelong tactician of the Velner Order, once proud of my clarity and reason, now wore a rusted Terran dog tag around my neck, not because it had my name, but because it didn't. Because it reminded me of someone who fought so hard she didn't need to be remembered by name to matter. The humans left more than victories in their wake. They left a contagion, a beautiful, terrible sickness of will, of refusal, of memory. In the aftermath, Coalition leadership wanted to sanitize the story. They called Hollow a strategic loss. They labeled the Wall of Bones a regrettable psychological tactic. They told us to remove the music, to return to order, to forget. But we didn't. We couldn't. Every species that fought beside humanity was now marked by them. Changed in ways we hadn't asked for and would never undo. We didn't just remember the Terrans. We emulated them. I saw Forge cult AI programs writing poetry. I watched Xander hatchlings learn Earth languages before their own. I heard a Vorkari elder whisper, "Anchor down," to calm a screaming child. Hollow had died, but the Terrans had not. They had scattered like embers into all of us. And slowly, one by one, we began to realize the truth. We had fought beside monsters, yes, creatures of claw and steel, of acid blood and psychic terror. But it was the humans who had shown us what monsters could be when they decided to fight for the light. They didn't just resist extinction, they infected us with resistance. Their strength had never been in weapons or warforms. It had been in the way they carried their pain like a torch. In the way they remembered. In the way they screamed into the abyss not to be heard, but to remind the abyss that it had not won. Years have passed now. Drelith is being terraformed, made green again. The Wall of Bones has been preserved not as a shrine of death, but of defiance. The human banner still flies over the place where the Void Spire once breathed. Not because the Terrans asked us to fly it, but because we could not bear to take it down. I now teach new recruits, mixed species, hybrid units, the children of a war fought in trenches and in thoughts. And when they ask me what it was like fighting with humans, I tell them this: imagine the last spark in the universe just before the dark comes. Now imagine it refuses to go out. That was humanity. They were the spark. They were the scream. And now they are the fire we carry. Not because they won the war, but because they showed us how to survive one. Not just in body, but in soul.